Hi, everyone. My name is Kevin Owocki. I am presenting today a presentation entitled 11 Milestones on the Path to a Financial System That's by and for the People. And I think that this is an experimental presentation for me. I'm a software developer. I spend my days building Gitcoin at Consensus, and it definitely feel way more comfortable with concepts in code, building great digital products that help people advance a use case. And I've recently been giving a few more talks that are a little bit more philosophical in nature, because I think it's fun when we're at these events and we're face-to-face exchanging information to try to make sense of what it is that we're building collaboratively together and where it is that we're going. I think that building a peer-to-peer financial system is something that's a very abstract idea, but it feels to me tangibly that's where people really want to go in this space. And so just articulating exactly what that means, I think, could be a really high use of our time, even if it is outside of our comfort zone and it's not as tangible as code. So thank you to Consensus, which is the primary financial backer of Gitcoin and the reason that I'm here able to be full-time in the Ethereum space today. Like many of you, I come to the Ethereum space dissatisfied with the status quo of the financial system that we've inherited from the baby boomers. Not happy with various things about the financial system, basically the concentration of wealth, how hard it is to get access to financial services, especially if you're in different parts of the world that don't have access that we have here in the United States. Lack of programmability is, for me as a programmer, something that I think is missing in the existing financial system. And so I think that there's a lot of people in this space that are here because they're not feeling like the innovation that we've seen in the consumer web in the last 20 years that's led to better user experiences around hailing a cab, getting a job, finding a girlfriend, have made it into like healthcare and finance. And I think that it's worth recognizing that the status quo is maybe the first milestone that we're all going through together as we start to think about a peer-to-peer financial system that's by and for the people. And it's with that in mind that I want to say that I think that we're limited somewhat by our imagination of what the financial system could look like, because we've all lived our entire lives with the financial system that was built after World War II by the baby boomers. And when I think about this, there's this philosophical analogy called Plato's cave, where basically there's this person who's been in a cave all their life, and all they've ever experienced of the real world of the sun is shadows that are playing on the wall of the cave. And in this story, in this parable, when they go outside and they actually see the real world, they don't know what to make of it because they've spent their entire lives in this cave only looking at shadows on the wall. And I think that this is a sort of, for me, a powerful analogy and a way of thinking about the financial system, because I know I was explaining Bitcoin to my Uber driver maybe like 2 or 3 weeks ago. I like to get outside of the blockchain bubble every once in a while. And by the end of the presentation, he was like, "Man, you're off the reservation with this stuff." And I think that, like, in a way, it's true. If you've only been living inside the cave your entire life, then going outside into the sun is kind of a fundamentally different thing. And so I want to start a conversation articulating what life outside the cave could look like and what we could be building here together. And I'm really excited to be here in the Ethereum space talking about DeFi and talking about DAOs with everyone, because it's a fertile ground for experimentation of what's actually possible. And as an engineer, that for me is a way of grounding these conversations in something that's tangible. And Andreessen Horowitz has this really amazing blog post comparing a crypto network to a city. So as opposed to a company which is top down and has a CEO, a city is more of kind of like a loosely connected group of individuals who are connected by geography and rely on the same foundational resources and are building economies on top of that. And it's a really elegant analogy, I think, for what's going on in the blockchain city. Here in North America, we have Toronto, we have New York City. I went to college near Philadelphia, and each of these are economic systems in our existing world. Crypto networks, if you think about them in a way, are economic systems are in this analogy in which there's different applications that are being built up, investments, jobs, savings based off of these base layer protocols. And so this experimentation of crypto networks is sort of an interesting place to start to think about what this peer-to-peer financial system can be. And I'm pretty excited by the trends in 2019 around DAOs, around DeFi. I think that there's actual tangible things that are in live in production in the Ethereum network being used today, and that's a really exciting thing to me. But I will say that I really think that some people in this space have differing visions of what the ideal peer-to-peer financial system will look like. And I put it along the following axes. So I think that we've inherited sort of a vision of what the peer-to-peer financial system could look like from the Bitcoin community, which I think inherits its vision for an ideal world from kind of like a libertarian Ayn Rand style vision of the world, in which collectivism is evil and the thing that really matters is your mind and body and the sovereignty of the choices that you're able to make as an individual, sovereignty of your economic access, if you want to move from place to place, being able to take your wealth with you. And I think that that's one end of the spectrum of what people are shooting for with an ideal world in this space. And I think that on the other end of that spectrum, and it's completely mutually exclusive with libertarianism, is kind of a more Gaia hypothesis type vision of the world, in which the entire world is one organism and we have global ecological diversity that's supported by the financial system. It almost sounds like an oxymoron. Global financial system that's supportive of ecological diversity. You've got local social harmony in your communities, and you've got spiritual abundance in the individual. But you could conceive of the collectivism vision as that we're all one organism flying on spaceship Earth, and the world will just be better if we're creating a more equitable distribution of resources, and that we unite around our common global challenges that we're going through. And I think that these visions are fundamentally mutually exclusive with each other. I mean, you can think about it on the axis of collectivism being good or evil. Libertarianism is built around the idea of sovereignty of the individual, and no one can come into my space, don't tread on me. And Gaia hypothesis is built around the collective, the idea of Earth as one sort of organism, and the sharing of resources and sovereignty around that. And I think that I definitely get a little bit more of a Gaia hypothesis vibe from the Ethereum community, from the Bitcoin community, but there is that sort of inheritance of the sovereignty of the individual that we get from the Bitcoin community. And I think articulating this as an axis is sort of going to be important as Ethereum goes a little bit more mainstream and we start to see more adoption of the financial system. And it's with that in mind that I want to say I think it's really powerful that we're designing a whole new financial system, because it means that we can design incentives into our money. And so is anyone in the audience, do you guys have experience with machine learning at all? Or okay, so like there's this concept in machine learning in which you're training an agent, and basically you want it to get to the top of a hill. You want it to localize, or you want it to maximize its benefits by climbing an incentive gradient. So there's this idea of a heuristic that you can apply to the world, and you can basically say to the agent, right now you're at level 0 of the heuristic, and I want you to climb the local hill and find level 5 of that heuristic. And so this is sort of how you can train an AI agent to climb a hill, but it's also a natural thing for other agents in the economic world to be doing to try and climbing the hill. The sort of like canonical example of climbing an economic heuristic for everyone in this room is increasing the amount of money in your bank account, increasing your net worth. We're all building careers, we're all building families, and it's a common goal to build up your bank account. And it's with this in mind, I want to introduce something that is based off of similar ideas, but is a little bit more off the reservation, to use the words of my Uber driver, and that's this idea that I learned from Sam Harris about just like there's an economic landscape that you as an agent can climb, what if there was a moral landscape? So basically a heuristic that isn't about the number of money that you have in your bank account, but it's based off of how morally you and your family and your society is living around you. And, you know, we've all learned about moral relativism if we took anthropology in college. The idea from Sam Harris is that there's a moral landscape that's inherently objective, and the heuristic function is how much suffering or lack of suffering is being created by your actions in your local community. And so you can imagine an agent that wants to climb a moral landscape by reducing suffering, increasing well-being in their local community or in the world. And we're designing the incentives of the information age in the Ethereum space. If you believe that, then the ideal case of what we could design is designing our ethics into our money, and designing a world in which you're climbing the economic hill and you're also reducing suffering, you're also increasing the moral harmony, the spiritual abundance of your local community, the ecological diversity at the same time. But one of the things that I think that we've inherited from the existing financial system is that a lot of times you'll be climbing the economic landscape, but you won't be climbing the moral landscape. Or maybe you're externalizing harm and you're actually actively doing damage to the moral landscape when you're climbing your economic. You're an agent that's climbing the economic heuristic. And you know, why do you think it is that teachers and firefighters make so much less than bankers or pharmaceutical companies? So I guess the TLDR of this guidepost is that if we can design a world in which people are climbing the moral landscape, not externalizing harm as they climb the economic landscape, and I think that that's a really powerful idea. And I'd love to expand on it with some of you after I get through my presentation. Like I said, we're backed by Consensus, which is a project that Joe Lubin is at the helm of. I've listened to a lot of his talks and interviews to understand his vision. One of the things that he talks about in his vision, which I agree with, is this idea of what if everyone owns a piece of everything? Would that be a better world? Because people will be incentivized economically to not externalize harm because they own a piece of their local communities, of the businesses in their local communities that they're transacting with, and does that shift the time preference of people's economic interactions such that they're more aligned with each other? I haven't fully baked this, but I think it's an interesting idea. Let's see, how are we doing on time? I have 10 minutes left. Has anyone in the audience read Meditations on Moloch by any chance? All right, I got one person. Sweet. It's a long read, but it's been passed around a lot in the Ethereum community over the last year or so, and it's obviously popularized by the meme of Moloch DAO. Which, how many people in the audience have heard of Moloch DAO? Okay, so more people have heard of Moloch DAO than Meditations on Moloch. So the TLDR of Meditations on Moloch, which is worth a read in itself, is it's a narrative that is using the Canaanite god of Moloch to talk about the phenomenon of coordination failures in our world. And in this narrative universe, there are several gods. And I'm not religious. I just think that this is like a very elegant narrative way of talking about different forces that are animating human nature. So there's Moloch, which is the god of coordination failure. There's a god called Non, Gnon, which is the god of nature, of our physical needs. So we all need to put food on the table. We all need to stay healthy. We all need to have food and shelter. And Non is sort of the god that holds us accountable to those needs of being able to take care of our physical and nourishment as sort of like a condition of living in this world. And then there's a third god, which is called Eula, which is the god of philosophy and love and all of the soft things. And as opposed to the first two gods, Moloch and Non, which require their followers to worship them, Non is the only one that has followers that adhere to it, but without forcing them to worship them, without forcing sacrifice. But Non is also sort of like the third god in the order of operations of what all the followers in this world pay down. So it's sort of like an elegant narrative of thinking of the idea of coordination, failure, and the incentive stacks that animates human society. And I think that the more tangible example of this is in your economic life. What is the incentive to advance your own gain in exchange for reducing the well-being of the whole? That's the definition of a coordination failure. So if you're a power plant in a big city, then you basically have an incentive to dump your trash in the river if you can get away with it, if you can externalize that harm, and that saves you some costs in your operations of the power plant, but it reduces the well-being of the whole. The more like game theoretically pure example of Moloch's influence is just the prisoner's dilemma, in which you have two agents that are captured by law enforcement, and they're given a dilemma in which they can, when they're put in separate rooms, either rat on each other or they can remain silent. And game theoretically, the best outcome that they can do is to both remain silent and each get less of a sentence because the police have less evidence on them. But in practice, more and more people will statistically defect and rat on each other because they're not able to coordinate when they're in the separate rooms that they're put in by the police officers. So I think that when I think about designing economic games, if you can reduce the amount of coordination failures against economic agents in the system, then you can create a more globally optimized world, optimized well-being. And what's really exciting about being in the Ethereum space is that the founding myth in my mind of Ethereum is creating transparent economic games that can't be changed. We've got this concept of immutability. So you're now playing an economic game that allows you to solve some of the coordination, transparency, information asymmetry problems that allow Moloch and his malign influence to influence human nature. And for me, this is the founding myth of Ethereum, and it's something that's still true today, I think, and it animates a lot of the ideals in the Ethereum community. And the technology itself is a really amazing thing, but I'm excited by the social norms that I'm seeing develop in this space. For me, Ethereum is a Schelling point for the hopeful, that we can transcend our industrial age institutions and all of the problems and baggage that we've inherited from the baby boomers, and we can build a new information age infrastructure of peer-to-peer financial relationships, and we can build a fundamentally more just, more economically and moral aligned world than didn't exist before. And that is my articulation of where I'd like to see this space go. The reason I'm giving this presentation is I want to hear from all of you where you would like to go. And I think that the stakes have never been higher. I have a kid, and I've got another kid on the way right now, and I don't want to pass along to them the same sort of civilizational debt that we've inherited from the baby boomers. And the ones that matter to me are climate change, the idea of a world that's, you're turning up the heat, you're turning up the heat. It's like a game of musical chairs where the music just keeps getting faster. That's fucking scary as shit. The idea that we can't make sense of anything in our world, and now there's all this disinformation, is a really scary thing to think about, not only for my lifetime, but for my children's lifetime. And I think that these are problems that we're gonna have to solve. But it gives me a lot of hope to see, like I said, for me, Ethereum is a Schelling point for the hopeful, and it gives me a lot of hope to see the momentum that we're seeing in this space, to see DeFi growing bigger and better, our peer-to-peer financial system by and for the people growing bigger every day. I'm trying to do my part with Gitcoin. This is our mesh network of jobs, what I like to call it. Every node in the network is someone that's participating, and every edge is an economic transaction that they've participated in. And I don't take the mission of building up the economic infrastructure for jobs lightly. I think that there's a lot of things that are really good about the old world, the social safety nets of being able to retire, being able to have savings and not live from gig to gig, being able to have insurance. And it's sort of my vision that once we have enough activity going through this peer-to-peer mesh network of jobs, that we're going to be able to reconstruct what's working in the old world in the new world. Let's see, I'm going to speed through the rest of this because I think that we're almost out of time, but I sort of have started to conceptualize the global financial operating system that we're building, Ethereum OS, as sort of a permissionless dApp store that anyone can contribute value to, that anyone can add to. And I think that that's in a lot of ways what we're doing here at ETH Waterloo. Our mission at Gitcoin is to grow and sustain open source to provide financial opportunities to coders. And I think that a world in which open source software contributing to the commons and actually getting paid, being able to pay your mortgage is, while you're doing it, while you're providing that value to the world, is a fundamentally more just, more economically fair world to software developers. And it's a great pleasure to be in the Ethereum city and to be building this together with all of you. I will very quickly end by saying that all of the art in this presentation has been created on Gitcoin, and I'm licensing it Creative Commons. So if you follow me on Twitter, my last name's Owocki, that's my Twitter handle. I will be tweeting out a link to the Creative Commons artwork that's in this presentation, and please use it. Please take it back to your local communities and explain some of these concepts to the people in your network, because I want to create conversation about where we're headed with this global peer-to-peer financial system that we're building. And I think that I'm at least a very visual person. If you can be more visceral in how you explain things, then a picture's worth 1,000 words, and I want to enable you to start having these conversations with people that you care about. I'm exactly out of time right now. Thank you very much for coming to my presentation. Please nerd out with me in the hallways, and if you see me at ETH Waterloo, I would talk about this stuff all day, every day, and my wife won't let me talk about it at home, so I want to talk about it with you. Thank you, everyone.